Okay, so today's topic is going to be slavery and how debt equals slavery in the modern world. Because unlike in the past when slavery was done more in your face, now it's more subtle, but it's still there. Because a slave is someone that owns nothing. Slave owns nothing. And the economy, as in large, is moving towards this kind of rent rather than own paradigm. Okay, so you're not going to own your music; you're going to stream it on Spotify. You're not going to own the movies that you are watching. You're instead going to rent them. You're going to stream them instead. You're going to pay a subscription every single month for them. And once I started to realize that what debt really is, and I began to realize just how pervasive it is in our society, and how I just wanted to share this so that somebody else that's watching this will be able to look at this and be like, okay, well, I'm in this cycle. I'm kind of struggling here. And I need to kind of step back and understand this. Now, the way that our kind of modern economic system has been developed is that, in the past, we tied most of our money to gold. So gold it's very rare, and you can't really make gold. Okay, so it's rare. You can't just make it out of nothing, and because it's rare and you can't really make it out of nothing, it stays its value stays high, and it doesn't go down in value over time. If anything, the value of gold actually goes up in value over time. But we have now got something called fiat currency. So we used to tie the American dollar to gold, but now it's not tied to anything. It's just tied to whatever we agree it to be, which is very dangerous because over time, the value of the dollar, as we've seen, has gone down, and that has led to inflation. And the modern economy has been engineered to benefit those that are the most wealthy, because when someone who is of lower, I don't like to use these terms, but lower and middle class, when they typically get income, most of their income goes towards bills. It goes towards buying things, groceries, bills, all those kinds of things. So it goes back into the economy. But most of the rich people or the upper class, they buy assets. And assets grow with inflation. So as the inflation increases, the rich get richer because the value of their assets is increasing. But the poor person or the middle class person, that's not really happening because they don't have a significant amount of assets. And what happens is this leads to an increase in the inequality in a society. So in the past, like, long time in the past, or which is actually for most of human history, you have one or two people owning most of the resources. So one person would own most of the resources, and then everybody else, whoever's left, would own the rest of the resources. So this could be many people owning the rest of these resources. And these typically are, small amounts of resources. So in the past, you'd have a landlord or somebody who would, like a lord, and they would own most of these resources, and people would basically pay a fee to work off of their land, pay a fee to work for them, or get paid to work for them. Now, what happens is most societies, they tend towards inequality. That is just the natural course of things. Like everything tends towards inequality because you are going to end up with, people colluding with each other to get bigger in their business or to be more corrupt and find ways to kind of hoard more wealth. There's certain attributes in terms of people, and the attributes that that cause them to hold more wealth, to get more wealthy, and then over time this leads to a smaller proportion of people owning a greater proportion of the assets, which means that whatever's left over, more people have to fight over it. So, it wasn't until about the 1950s, post World War II, to about the 1980s, where the income of all classes was very similar. So if you look at the income of all classes as as the rich people's income increased, so too did the middle class persons and the lower class persons as well. But then after the 1980s, or around that time in the Western society, in most Western societies, you notice that the richer people, their wealth increased considerably more. And that's by design, because they wanted to accumulate more. They wanted to do more. And they've put in place policies, they lobbied governments in order to get to the point where they designed a system that benefits them the most. And that's the same system that we're dealing with today. Because in this system, they engineer inflation. So they increase inflation by printing more money. Printing more money. And what that does is, one, it's going to raise asset prices, which means that the richer people who own these assets become more wealthy over time. And two, it's going to disproportionately affect those of middle and lower class, because people of middle and lower class, they don't have as many assets, or they don't have significant enough assets to protect themselves or hedge themselves against inflation. Because most people that are working class, their hours and their time is directly tied to their income. Whereas people in the upper classes, that's not the case. It's their assets that are tied to their income. And because they have more assets, this goes up. So essentially, this kind of system that we're living in, it benefits these rich people. It really makes it difficult for people who are of middle and lower class to become more successful within it, because even if you're trying to climb up from one level to the next level, most of these Western societies, they have very high taxes. Okay, taxes on income. Okay, like income tax. Whereas rich people, they make most of their money through investments, and those investments normally have tax advantages. And that is essentially why the richer people are able to kind of hoard more wealth. And that is why, especially now in today's society, why everyone who isn't in the uppermost class is feeling the pinch of the economy and the way things function. So how does this relate back to debt? Now, debt isn't necessarily bad, but it's more so high interest debts. High interest debt. Or even interest in general. Because there's many reasons why interest was banned in many pre-industrial societies. Interest was banned in many of those societies, and it was deemed a sin in many societies, known as usury. And that was a sin of interest, sin of charging excessive interest, charging interest. Because what happens is, let's say you owe somebody $100, or let's say someone owes you, let's say, you agree to borrow $100, and there's like a 20% interest rate on that. Well, then if you just had to pay back the $100, eventually you can pay it off if it was a set value. But what interest does is that interest makes it much harder for you to pay off the debt, because interest is increasing the value of your debt over time, which leads to a debt cycle, a debt spiral, where people cannot pay for the debts that they previously took out, and the debts keep accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. And this topic is very dear to my heart, because I many family members, or many people who have family members and parents who didn't understand just how pervasive debts can be. I've seen just how detrimental it can be to my parents' mental health, or just other family members, their mental health and just their well-being, because it's a very scary cycle, because you have to live to pay back your debts. You have to work hard to pay back your debts. And it is essentially a form of slavery, because until you have paid off the debt for, let's say, a mortgage, or let's say a car repayment, then that item doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to somebody else. And that's why I say that interest and debt is the modern day form of slavery. Because why would you force someone using violence? Like, why would you use violence to enslave people when instead people can use debts? Because this doesn't feel like slavery. Okay, this just feels like empowerment for some people. Like, people think that being able to buy on credit is a sense of empowerment, but that gets them stuck working harder, working longer, more than they really want to work, because they are stuck in that cycle of having to pay off those debts. And those debts, even if they're small amounts at first, they can snowball into something much, much greater, because debts would increase over time. And we all know with compound interest, it might start off small, but it gets higher and higher and higher. And especially where I live here in Australia, many people, they have to take these big mortgages to then go and buy houses, to get something that's such a fundamental, basic human need as shelter. They have to get these almost $1 million loans to buy a house, to get shelter, to start a family. Because the thing is, it's a very slippery slope, because as you start to let people borrow more money, well, then the asset prices go up. So then people have to borrow even more money to pay for even higher asset prices, and they're going to keep on going and going and going until eventually it's going to reach a breaking point where people just cannot no longer afford to buy those homes or buy those assets. So that can lead to societal decline, as it is right now. Like, people aren't really having children, and much of that is to do with economics, rather than cultural things. That many people would love to have children, but they just don't feel like they can afford that with the state of the economy, especially here in Sydney, Australia. When you look at something like 20% of, if you kind of look at these mortgages, obviously mortgages around like 5%, 4% these days, much lower before. You're going to be ending up paying maybe $2 million for a house that you bought. And the problem here is there's no real winners here. It's just a cycle of, fake progress. If things like houses and basic human needs go up in value, that isn't really progress. That's just, one, the value of your currency is going down, and two, speculation within the market. And that can be very, very detrimental to everybody, because it's just going to make it very, very dangerous for anyone that's trying to make ends meet. So so with debts, you essentially become enslaved, and you become stuck working in your job, because if you didn't have debts and you didn't have these liabilities, you can take more risks. You can maybe, rather than just having a job, you can start a side hustle, or you can risk starting a business and getting more wealthy. So debts are a way that a lot of the elites and a lot of the upper class people try and keep people like working class and middle class people enslaved and in this trap of working all the time. Because if you were somebody that had a mortgage, an expensive mortgage, and you had a finance car, and that's assuming that you've only done these things and not just finance some other things like furniture as well, well, then you're going to be very obedient. You're going to be very docile, right? You're going to want to listen to your boss at work. You're afraid of getting fired because you have these liabilities. And that is how the system has entrapped us. Because debt is, especially high interest debt, it's such an unnatural thing. It was made illegal in so many different places prior to the 1900s, because of how perverse it can be and how people can charge so much interest on this. So only a very small handful of people actually benefit from this, but eventually we're going to reach a point where people cannot pay back their debts. If that can't happen, then the banks are just going to fall. They're going to not work anymore, and they're going to collapse, and then society would also collapse. So it's very important that people realize that just how pervasive these debts are, and how they are, if they kind of overextend themselves financially, and if they try to live outside of their means, especially by using credit, then they're going to be trapped in this system of enslavement, because they'll be trapped working and forced to work rather than having the choice to work.